it can ignite, and all you gotta do is bring the lights. Cause a new light shine, cause a new light shine. Time to get on up, see tradition is mine.
Shalom, everyone. Welcome back to the Light Lab podcast. My name is Eliana Light, and I'm here with my dear friends, Cantor Ellen Dreskin.
Hello, everybody.
And Rabbi Josh Wachowski.
Hello again.
So great to be back together. And we have, as we often do, an opening question. I want to hear, when do you feel most connected to the earth? When do you feel connected to the earth, either in general or a particular story that is coming to mind right now? Oh, I'm first. Listeners, I am going to ask myself that question. When do I feel connected to the earth? Well, my mom tells me that when I was a small child, I would run around our backyard and hug trees. And that hasn't really gone away. That is a tendency that stays with me. When people ask why I moved down here to Durham, North Carolina, one of the top 3 reasons is the trees. And they might laugh, but I'm telling you, the trees down here are incredible. They're so big and so massive and so old. And there's just this beautiful sense that I get from the trees that they have been here a lot longer than me. They're going to be here a lot longer after I'm gone. And it makes whatever sort of little thing that I'm thinking about just really pale in comparison to the grandeur of time. I was just at this conference called Cornerstone. We played this phrase craze game. Shout out Dr. Shore. I don't know if you're listening or not, but I'll send this to you, where one person says a word, another person says another word that is alliterative, and the third person finds a definition. And one of the groups came up with tree time, the idea that trees kind of run on their own time span. And if we look at our life in tree time, it seems a lot more spacious, one might say. Also, there's this cool thing down here where when you drive, the trees, foliage, like all the greenery, just goes over the road. And my friend calls it a tree tunnel, which is really beautiful. So even though the pollen this year has been terrible, I feel grateful to the beautiful trees here for helping me feel rooted, one might say, in the earth. Josh, I'll pass it to you. How do you feel connected to the earth?
I love that. You know, when you asked this question just now, it brought me directly back to a specific memory as a time to, like, as opposed to feeling connected at a variety of different places. And in college, I spent a summer in the rainforest in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Instead of taking science credits at Columbia, you could do conservation biology in the rainforest for 5 weeks, and it counts as 2 science credits. And I'm not a science person, so I was like, sign me up. So I went to the rainforest for 5 weeks, and I did a project about the understory of eucalyptus trees, which were brought in to the rainforest to help with deforestation, which was really wonderful for a little bit of time. But then eucalyptus trees are colonizers, so there were like eucalyptus groves everywhere. They were sort of taking over the forest. But what I would do is I would just wander through these eucalyptus groves and like count the bugs in different squares to see if there was a lot of life living around them. And those were some of the times when I was most alone, in the most literal sense, right? I was just like out in the rainforest by myself. Everyone had a different project. And so I was just in a grove of eucalyptus groves by myself, just counting bugs and just being in the forest by myself alone. And I think about that often whenever I'm out in nature, just like what was a moment just to be alone with the trees. And there was also there were a couple of paved roads in the forest, but they were always in those sort of tree tunnels that you were talking about. And there would be these giant spider webs going across the road and some monkeys that were all over the place. And that was my most immersive nature experience. And I think back to it often.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I love that image, just being present. All I need to do right here is be by this tree and count all these bugs. That's great. Ellen, what about you?
Wow, I find that more and more I'm seriously considering us humans as animals, which sounds normal because of course we are. And I don't think we put ourselves in a different class. And the more I think about us just being as another kind of animal on this earth, the more I feel connected to being a living being. And what you were saying about the trees, Eliana, I'm intrigued with the idea that we're breathing in connection with trees and with plants. That right there is a relationship that cannot be severed. That is such an every second that I take a breath, a reminder of that connection. So I use that a lot as kind of a mantra, as kind of a meditational thing of, I guess, trying to reconnect now. And oddly enough, the counting of the Omer reminds me of that, because even though we're no longer farmers, I'm still connected to that idea of the original counting of the Omer being all about harvest and offering and being grateful for that kind of abundance. It didn't have to be that way, this symbiotic relationship with nature. So I'm reattaching myself these days.
That's beautiful. We breathe in what the trees breathe out, and vice versa. It's all around us all the time, but like with so much of what we talk about on this show, it takes something nudging us, calling our attention to notice what is going on. So what is going on? Why are we talking about trees and the earth? What are we doing here, Josh?
Well, Liana, we are making our way through our Amidah journey. And I love what you're saying about just pausing and noticing, because there are so many places to pause and notice in the Amidah. And we're in the process of entering our open house of the Amidah. We're really kind of far into it at this point. We've explored a whole lot of the text we've had so far already, starting from the very beginning of just preparing ourselves to enter into this house. We kind of stood on the doormat for a little bit with Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, and then we moved into just those words of blessing, Baruch Ata Adonai, what it means to just open ourselves up to blessing. And as soon as we entered, there were so many things to see. The house was really decorated with a lot of really nice things, every room with its own theme. We talked through our ancestors and clung them into a moment of prayer. We talked through the sort of powers that we're expressing both in the divine and also within ourselves. We talked about holiness and what that means. And then we talked about all the different things that we're asking for, requesting, or naming that we want to call out for ourselves or that we notice in the world, those being beginning with knowledge, moving into a place of repentance and forgiveness, figuring out what comes after repentance and forgiveness, which we hope is redemption, and then coming into not just our spiritual sense, but also our physical bodies and thinking about healing, what healing looks like, what healing feels like, how we ask for healing, and what kind of healing vibes we're sending out into the world. And now we've arrived at the blessing of Shanim, Mevarech HaShanim, which we'll talk about in a second as we move into what these words are trying to say and how we orient ourselves towards this piece and this new room in our Amidah journey. All right, we think we're ready to jump in? Here we go. So I'm going to read the blessing in Hebrew, and I'm reading today from the Lev Shalem Conservative Siddur. So I'll read in the Hebrew, and then I'll read the English translation we have here. And again, our questions are just, what do we notice? What are we seeing? What are we experiencing within these words? Barech Aleinu Adonai Eloheinu et hashana hazot ve'et kol minei tvu'ata letova v'ten bracha or v'ten tal umatar livracha al pnei ha'adama v'sab'enu mituva uvarech shnatenu kashanim hatovot Baruch ata Adonai mevarech hashanim. In this Siddur, it titles all of the brachot. So this one is titled A Time of Abundance. Adonai, our God, make this a blessed year for us. May its varied harvest yield prosperity. May the land be blessed, or be blessed with dew and rain, and satisfy us with its goodness. Bless this year that it be like the best of years. Baruch ata Adonai, who is the source of blessing of each year. What do we see? What do we notice? Any other translations you're working from?
I'm looking, I would love to go more into, and I think that probably we could say something about how come at that one point there are two different phrases depending upon the time of the year. I'm looking at Kol HaNeshama, the Reconstructionist Daily Siddur, and for each of the Chatimot of the Amidah, there's a different name for God in the Chatimah. And so just interesting that for this blessing, it's blessed are you, all bountiful. And there's a lot of repetition in the translation upon bounty and all the forms of produce that the land brings. And also that Kishanim HaTavot, that good years, or this one, this translation specifically says, give blessing to this year as in the good years of the past. There's that phrase of like the good old days that stuck out at me when I was reading it.
Ellen, it's interesting. I also noted something about time, which was the phrase Hashana Hazot, which really brings it into the present moment, in the sense that the petitionary prayers that came before, we want healing, we seek redemption, all of these things in general, all of these things as soon as possible, probably. But time seems kind of fluid in those moments. And yet here we're saying Shana Hazot. This is about this year. This is about what is happening now and what has happened in the past and what has happened in the future. It really grounds us in time. I'm working out of my People's Prayer book, and it's titled Shanim, years, this blessing. But it was interesting to me when I really started to read it that if what we're actually asking for is produce and good things to come out of the earth, why is so much of the blessing focused on time? They seem to be two different spheres.
I take that right back, Eliana, to what you said about tree time. At the very beginning of all this produce and all the gifts that nature provides us are entirely dependent upon the seasons happening when they happen, and the amount of nutrients from the earth and the amount of rain coming from the sky, that the years need to be on that time in order that there can be tree time. There's those cycles.
You know, what you're saying kind of makes me think of the fact that our calendar adjusts itself, but the way that we've established our calendar changes so that we can be connected to the right agricultural cycles, right? We add in the lunar calendar in Judaism, we add in a whole month whenever our holidays get a little out of whack so that we can line back up with the years and line back up with the seasons and make sure that we're encountering that we are ready at the moments when the earth is ready. So we don't ask the earth to realign itself for our holidays. We're the ones that have to adjust to make sure that we're connected to the earth when it's ready for us. So I thought that was really interesting. And I'm also the word that pops out at me, in addition to the word shanim, is the word tov. And that it comes in three totally different iterations. The first is, right, the good produce, the tuatal tova. And then the vesabenu mituva is let's be satiated from its goodness. And I wonder if there's a way to read it not just as the earth's goodness, but as the year's goodness. I don't really know necessarily what that would mean.
One thing that I'm just now noticing is that in both of the Sidurim that I'm looking at, the Reconstructionist and the Reform Sidur, don't say V'sabenu mituvah. They say V'sabenu mituvecha, and they turn it back to God. And I prefer giving the land its own agency to respond, to do it itself. I hope in the same way that it's a living being that we give ourselves agency.
And I feel like theologically that's an interesting choice for the Reconstructionist Siddur and even the Reform Siddur to move to God's goodness as opposed to the land's goodness.
Many, many, many old Jewish texts were there, and it allows us to compare and contrast kind of ancient versions of texts that we have with the modern versions we have. And I don't think we've actually looked back in it during our Amidah series. So let's see what we have. Barech Aleinu Adonai Eloheinu et Hashana Hazot L'Tova B'chol Minei Tvuata B'karev Mehera Shnat Kates Geulatenu B'ten Talu Matar Al Pnei Ha'adama B'shova Ulam Me Otzrot Tuvecha B'ten Bracha B'Maaseh Yadenu Baruch Atah Adonai Mevarech Hashanim. So that means, bless this year for us for goodness through its produce, Adonai our God, and quickly bring the year near that ends our exile. So this just kind of drops a whole nother theme in it, connecting the earth to the exile, because the next blessing, spoiler alert, is about the ingathering of the exiles, but we've just dropped a line right in here. Grant dew and rain on the surface of the ground and eternal abundance from the stores of your goodness, and grant blessing through the work of our hands, which is also a piece that we're missing. The Maaseh Yadenu bit. Blessed are you, Adonai, who blesses our years. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's super fascinating. And it also made me think about trying to pull this out of its agricultural context and think about, us who don't live necessarily always within an agricultural society anymore. What is our produce? Right? Maybe our produce isn't only like the fruits, but maybe it is the fruits of our hands also. So what does it look like to be asking for success as in the way that we produce in our labor in this bracha, not just necessarily from the fruits, but also from the work of our hands?
Yeah, the what are we harvesting? And over a period of time, what are we, consciously trying to grow there? I love that idea.
And just to go back to the question and the point about when we change the verse in the particular blessing, right? We said in part of the year we say v'tein bracha, right? Give blessing, and in part of the year we say v'ten tal umatar livracha, give dew and rain with blessing. We say the bracha one from Passover until the beginning of December. December 3rd is the date that I have here in my Siddur. And then from December 4th up until Passover, we say v'ten tal umatar livracha, blessing for dew and rain. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is one of the only phrases where there's a shift in the phrase that happens on a specific calendrical date as opposed to a holiday, right? So it's on this day when they assumed that this was in that time period when the dews would start to really fall in earnest, the rain would start to fall. And I think it's really interesting. We talked about this a little bit with Mashiv HaRuach Umorid Hagashem earlier in the Amidah, that we only ask for this in times when we know it's going to come, right? We don't say Talim Matar in the summertime because we don't ask for things that are unrealistic, or we ask for things or we name things that we think are going to be able to manifest that aren't outside the realm of possibility, which I think is important, that we were intentional about placing these words here in a time when we knew that something could actually happen as opposed to pipe dreams.
I'm connecting this too to the beginning of our Amidah, where it is inserted Mashiv HaRuach Umorid Hagashem, which we talked about, causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall, and how many people have the custom of adding a bivracha in that, which is in blessing. Now, this bracha has just put the bracha there. And why do we need to add the bracha in that moment and in this moment? Because we know that the weather and the climate and the rain can be for blessing and not for blessing, that it doesn't discriminate, I would say, right? That it's an acknowledgement that there is rain that is for blessing and rain that is not for blessing. And it brings up another issue here, which is just as I think in the healing blessing, we wrestled with the connection that a certain kind of theology has between personal morality and sickness and illness, with the connection between collective morality and weather and rain and whether your crops will grow or not. And the important things to remember about that tension and that theology and the difficult things. I'm wondering if that's come up for anyone.
I think of that paragraph which occurs after the Shema really is part of our Shema Ve'ahavta paragraphs, recitations that people have, particularly Reform Jews. It was left out of the Reform Siddur, this idea that, and if I don't behave well, then my crops will dry up kind of thing. But it is written, that passage, not as me personally. It's not first person singular. It's plural. If all of y'all don't get your act together and take care of the land, then yes, eventually your crops are going to get smaller. Your land is going to get drier. Nothing is going to work for you if you don't remember your partnership, your relationship with this physical land on which you live. We're aware of the fact that, we're in Shemitah year right now. And so even though we are not personally farmers, one of the three of us, I think that all of us have been spending a lot of time thinking about, well, what does Shemitah mean now? And in these days of climate change, et cetera, how important it is to let the land rest. That idea, again, of the land being a living thing like Shabbat and us, or, just going to sleep at night, that the land needs that time, or it will not be able to produce with us or for us if not given that same rest that we know that we need. So on all these levels, again, living things in partnership.
I think that's really beautiful. I love what you're saying about living things in partnership. I think it brings me back to a song I learned when I was a kid, which is by his name is Dedi Groucher. Oded Groucher is an Israeli singer. The song connects two very disparate verses. One is this blessing from Mevarech Hashanim, Uvarech Shnatenu Kashanim Atovot, Viten Kol Minei Tu'atar L'Tova, with the verses from Genesis where God promises the land to Abraham and to Jacob. And so in connecting those verses, it says, you're going to receive this land. This land's going to be yours. And hopefully you'll receive blessings from it. But there's this partnership. There's this action that has to go along with it. Ki et kol haaretz asher atar lecha ednena. It's going to be yours. But there's a responsibility that goes with it being yours, that you have to do something to take care of it. You have to steward it. You have to give it the rest that you take for yourselves. There's a partnership inherent in that blessing that we have to realize and actualize.
This is making me think of a podcast I listened to recently. Of course, I cannot remember which, but hopefully I will find it and we will put it in the show notes, about the national parks in America and how the national parks were called, right, America's greatest idea. And we're so lucky to have all of this beautiful land that is so pristine. And the podcast was talking to Native American tribal leaders about the fact that a lot of the national parks happened because Native people were pushed off of this land, and that there was a understanding of nature is one thing and we keep it pristine so that we can come and visit it when we want to, and we are something else and we are separate from that. And what it would look like to actually give the national parks back to the tribes that used to live there so that it could be living and breathing again, because we have so separated ourselves from the ecosystem. Our economic system requires us almost to not think about where our food comes from, to not think about where the animals are and how they get to the restaurant or to the grocery store, and not think about who's picking our food. And we have so kind of crowbar separated ourselves from that, so that even though we can think of it as a metaphor, like what have we planted? What are we harvesting in this time? I think it's also good to think about actual agriculture and the way that things are brought to us and are grown for us. I feel very lucky here. This whole episode might just end up being Eliana does a pitch for moving to Durham, because I do that a lot. But one of the things that keeps me here is my friends Meredith and Molly, who run One Soil Farm, which is a Jewish farm that is only a half an hour from the city. And they have a JCSA, Jewish Community Supported Agriculture. And every Wednesday, I get the vegetables and the fruits that they have grown in the soil with their own hands, according to Jewish values, what that means to them. And we've gone out to the land over Sukkot and even just on a Shabbat to celebrate. And our friends call ourselves farmer adjacent. What does it mean to be able to be farmer adjacent and have this connection and actively seek it out, even if you're not in a place where you feel that's possible, to give yourself more of this tangible connection? Because we can think of it in kind of an abstract way, knowing that our three major holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, all have a major agricultural element that we are not necessarily in touch now. How can we think about that both metaphorically and maybe get a little more into it physically?
The phrase "in touch" takes on a whole new meaning when you think about being a farmer, or even being farmer adjacent, or having that exposure, even for part of the year, even a day, actually being in touch with the land in that way. I'm in the middle of reading a great book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And Robin Wall Kimmerer is a botanist, a scientist, and is also a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. And she really goes into, in this book, the scientific ways in which certain flowers grow next to each other, purple and golden flowers grow next to each other, because it's more attractive to bees And one is purple and one is, she talks about asters and goldenrod, the purple and the golden together. And the first thing I went to was the color wheel and how these are complementary colors, and she has the most beautiful scientific explanations for things, combined with the attachment to the land that comes from being indigenous Native American. There's one passage that she talks about, which I would love to share now if that's okay with everybody else. She says, "We are showered every day with the gifts of the earth, gifts we have neither earned nor paid for. Air to breathe, nurturing rain, black soil, berries and honeybees, the tree that became this page, a bag of rice, and the exuberance of a field of goldenrod and asters at full bloom. Though the earth provides us with all that we need, we have created a consumption-driven economy that asks, what more can we take from the earth? And almost never, what does the earth ask of us in return? The premise of earth asking something of me, makes my heart swell. I celebrate the implicit recognition of the earth's animacy, that the living planet has the capacity to ask something of us, and that we have the capacity to respond. We are not passive recipients of her gifts, but active participants in her well-being. We are honored by the request. It lets us know that we belong." This idea of all of us really being deeply involved in this ecosystem and this checks and balances and caretaking and stewardship is brought home again and again. And I think this blessing right in the middle of all this just says, hello, you are Adam from Adamah. Adam doesn't mean Adam, the guy. The best translation that I've heard of Adam is earthling, because Adamah is the earth. And we are all that. We're from that. Mother Nature, Mother Earth. It's all more than metaphor.
That is so beautiful. And now I'm singing a song from my childhood in my head from Sesame Street. We are all earthlings. Do you remember that? We are all earthlings spinning around together on our planet of the sun. Oh my God, every time I think about it, it makes me cry. It's just the most beautiful thing in the world. And that's such a beautiful passage, Ellen. We think maybe about the covenantal relationship between the Holy One and the Israelites, but now I'm thinking, what does a covenantal relationship look like between us and the earth? Even though we are of one, kind of entering into this agreement. That's so, so beautiful. I love that you brought up Shemitah, Ellen, and thinking about what it means for the land to rest. But this year, through people really putting out really great resources on Shemitah, I learned an element of the halakha, the law of Shemitah, that I'd never noticed before, which is that it really requires you to be local. You're really only supposed to eat things that beasts around you could go out into your fields and eat, right? Because I think the rabbis who were putting this together were also thinking, well, what if you're not a farmer? Part of Shemitah is letting people come and take from the land and harvest for themselves, which gets back to what is the economic impact of what we do in the land. But then it's also, and then what's left over is for the beasts of the field and the animals to come, and what it looks like to localize and not just think about the impact that we have on the land, but the impact that we have on our neighbors and the economic system that's going on around us, to concentrate more locally.
Yeah, I think there's something really powerful in, first, the localization, but second of all, what you were saying about the covenantal relationship with God and applying that to the land, I think is so powerful and sort of fits in with where this bracha is in this section of the Amidah, like you were saying, Alan, right? We have to act with wisdom. We have to use our wisdom to know how we're going to interact with the world around us. We have to make sure that we're healing ourselves with healing our bodies and healing the land around us and taking care of everything that we see. And then we have to use that to engage and apply to the land also, right? Judaism requires something of us. I think that's something that's powerful about it. The only way to engage is to practice, is to do the things, is to try out and to do it within community and to do it in connection with the things, the people, the land around us. So I think it feels really natural to apply all of these things that Judaism is teaching us specifically to our connection to the earth as well.
I'll take it all the way back to Shema. And what does it mean to hear the one's echadity with everything else, that there's a connection, there's a biological, scientific, spiritual, everything connection going on here, that all of these blessings, I think, do such a great job of just waking us up to the smaller elements of that big oneness.
Ellen, I will never get tired of hearing you say echadity. It is one of my favorite words in the entire universe. And with that, we'll be right back. We have a really special treat today. I am here with the amazing Hazzan Jessi Roemer. Hi, Jessi.
Hi.
So glad
Great
to
to
have
be
you. So glad to have you on the podcast today. I am excited to talk to you about a particular song which has brought you here. But before we get there, I want to ask a very broad question that you can take in whatever direction you would like. Tell us about tefillah as it appears in your life.
Oh, right. As it appears in my life, it shows up in different ways. I think the initial draw for me to tefillah was really in community, starting with the community that I grew up in. I grew up in a chavurah of 26 families in the Washington, D.C. area, which had its own style of davening, of praying and gathering and rejoicing. And we didn't really actually, what we called ourselves reconformadox. It felt like a mesh of a lot of different styles of doing stuff. But actually what I realized later, that it was really heavily influenced by renewal style davening. And in fact, one of the founders was a central renewal Rabbi Arthur Wasco. And so I think my first experience with tefillah was really like that kind of a communal coming together, and it always involved song. It involved a lot of music. My mom was a cantor and a musician, cantor Sue Roemer, Zichrona Livracha. And she would, kind of pull together a room in a way that really people were engaged in something that felt very, very communal and also very personal. But tefillah didn't. So that was sort of the general context for me for immersion in tefillah growing up. And I think it became more personal once I started seminary. Once I started attending cantorial school with the Aleph program in the renewal movement. Or renewal, I guess we are a movement. And I started to understand a little bit more deeply what it would be to have a personal practice of tefillah. So, and then that is sort of deepened and changed and morphed over, the past several years since I started those studies and finished those studies and went into, working as a congregational chazan. But probably one of the most kind of tactile ways it shows up for me is offering kind of ritualistic, offering gratitude in sort of a ritual way. So lots of times, not always, but lots of times when I wake up in the morning, for example, I remember to kind of offer thanks. Sometimes I remember to do it before my eyes open, sometimes afterwards. And another way that it shows up pretty consistently is also offering thanks before I eat, which again, this is more maybe blessing than tefillah, but the line is thin. And for me, it's a little moment of prayer. It's a little moment of reflection. And it's something that evolved kind of naturally for me after being immersed more in the, studying the practices and the traditions of our heritage. And then it shows up, in communal moments still for me a lot. I mean, I'm involved often in leading it. And it's also, I've evolved musically into a space where I realize that what I'm trying to do most of the time, like when I'm in concert, when I'm leading, singing, not necessarily in a quote unquote prayer service, I realize that what I'm aiming for is a kind of a tefillah moment, achieving a moment of spirituality, which for me is really about allowing me and everybody who's with me, allowing ourselves to sink in and allow that moment to be not just about the particular text or not just about the note that we're hitting or that we're trying to hit, but really about that those things are a vehicle to connecting with the source and connecting with each other. And as a result, silence and sound have a lot of relationship there. So sometimes tefillah, creating a prayerful moment, is about allowing a note to ring into silence and just letting the silence be the prayer, the silence after singing. And then, also the singing is itself a prayer. It's that quote, when you sing, you pray twice. So that's sort of what comes most readily to mind when you ask, how does tefillah show up for me?
That's beautiful. So many great threads. The silence after singing is a prayer. I definitely feel that. And now, because I know what we're about to talk about, I'm almost thinking of Shemitah, this year of land rest, but I'm going to let you define it for yourself and for us, as a silence after singing, kind of in a land way. What we're talking about on this episode of the podcast is the blessing for shanim, for years, in the weekday Amidah, which is really a blessing for abundance and produce and the weather working together with the earth, which one might also call Hashem or God, to create the abundance that we are in relationship with. So I'm talking to you, Hazzan, Jessi, because as we heard a little clip of right before, your song, 6 años, 6 years, has really become a piece of liturgy for Shemitah. You don't really think of the Shemitah year as having liturgy, as having particular set prayers, which so many of our other ritual times in Jewish life do. So I want to ask you, how did 6 años come to be? What was your inspiration for writing it at all, for the way that you wrote it and brought it into the world?
Well, so this song came to be in the lead up to actually, believe it or not, the previous Shemitah year. So 7 years ago, or a little more than 7 years ago. And as we were approaching that year, I started looking at, the 3 times that Shemitah is mentioned in the Torah, or the concept, I should say, of Shemitah is mentioned in the Torah. Because one thing I was going on, as we know, when you're studying Torah text, when things get repeated, it's an indication that they should be paid particular attention to, right? So things that get repeated are important. And what I particularly liked about studying these 3 different passages that appear at different points in the Torah, but sort of all indicate the same thing. And in fact, the 2 of them have very, very similar language. 2 of them are very specifically about allowing the land to rest and replenish itself. And well, all 3 of them are about that, but really 2 of them mention the land, and then the third one really focuses on the people. And I loved how the 3 huge times this gets mentioned in the Torah, that the release of the land is intertwined with the release of the people, that you can't that you really can't have one without the other, and that part of the process of allowing the land to rest and breathe and replenish is this process of redistribution of wealth among a community. So it got me started thinking about, Shemitah is, of course, release, but it's also about redistribution of energy and of resources, a kind of re-equalizing in a sense. There was sort of a confluence of things that made this composition happen. One of them was that I was listening to at that moment, a lot of Iraqi and a lot of Turkish music, and also a lot of songs in Ladino. I was privileged to have grown up in the same area as Flori Jagoda, Zichronah Livracha, and had the privilege and opportunity of learning from her at various points during my growing up years. And really, Ladino was, something that both she and my mom kind of made a big part of my Jewish cultural education. At least music, that was sung in Ladino was a big part of that.
Can you share a quick word about what Ladino is for our listeners?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So Ladino is a combination of Spanish and Hebrew. It's basically the Yiddish of the Spanish-speaking Jews. So if Yiddish is, the combination of Eastern European languages, primarily German and Hebrew, but also Polish and Russian, depending on where you were. Ladino is developed similarly the same way for Jews that were living in Spanish-speaking countries. And so I had long kind of loved the sound of it, and then started thinking, oh, I wonder, I'm sure I basically looked up a Ladino translation of the Torah and was like thinking about, if I'm going to take some verses from Torah, why don't I, think about taking it from this Ladino translation, which I did. And to tell you the truth, I don't remember exactly how the melody came about. Other than that, at that time, I know I was listening to a lot of Turkish, like I said, Turkish and Iraqi music and Ladino songs. And what's funny about it is that I just started playing with the verses in the Ladino verses, and then this tune came out. And then after I'd finished it and kind of did a very kind of quick recording of it and notated it and sent it to my band. And then somebody said, oh, wait, this is in 7/8. The time of it, the
Wow.
musical time of it is in 7/8, which means that you repeat counts of 7 in order to produce the rhythm. And of course, what is it about? It's about repeating counts of 7 years. 7 years. Every 7 years, you have a Shemitah year. And I have to say, it was not a conscious intention when I set out to write it. It took somebody else noticing that for me to be like, oh.
Sometimes that happens. The best midrash, the best commentary is what other people find in our music. That's so beautiful. Why pick these particular verses from Leviticus as opposed to the other 2 places where it appears in Torah?
Yeah, good question. So there were a couple of reasons. One of them is that I really like the whole everything that surrounds these verses in Leviticus. I like reading this whole section. But I think also I was looking for the most succinct articulation of the idea that you plant your fields and, prune your grapes for 6 years, and then the 7th year is a rest. And so it was also that this particular section, the Torah, had it laid out sort of the most cleanly and the most succinctly, and that kind of in some ways lent itself poetically to music.
Very beautiful. And listeners, we're going to put a link to the text in the show notes so that you can see it both in Ladino and in the Hebrew and in the English to get a taste of that for yourself. I think it's so beautiful that the song came to you in a previous Shemitah cycle. Just as a musician myself, I know sometimes I can be in a rush to put things out, but then some things also benefit from rest, from work and from rest, and from work and from rest. what I love about the lines from Leviticus, and even titling it Sej Años, 6 years, is that there's also some importance put on the 6 years, meaning it's not a negative thing to work. It's not a negative thing to produce in the world, but it needs to be balanced with rest. There's a reason that comes once in 7 cycles and not 6 rest and 1 work, right?
Right.
I'm wondering where Shemitah, this year of land rest, well, first of all, how you would define Shemitah and how it has shown up for you in your life. Did you ever see it as a spiritual practice? And has it changed since this piece of music kind of came channeling through you?
That's such a great question. And I think also it connects to the qualifier that I'm about to say, which is that I did write and record this piece 7 years ago and put it out before the previous Shemitah as a recording on an album. I was working on my first album with my band Azuz. And so in that sense, the song didn't wait those 7 years to come out until now. But what did happen was this cycle, as it came around again, I started thinking about, okay, what's the next phase of this cycle for this song? Now that we've, because we do come around this every 7 years. And that's when I started thinking about making a video for it. So the song wasn't new this cycle, but the video I produced was. And I'll say that in and of itself is, to me, it feels like a little bit of its own Shemitah practice, taking a text and working with it every 7 years to produce, sort of build on what I've already worked with and work with it to produce something else. And I think it has. I think it's made me think a lot about, even just, having to put the work into the song, first of all, how it was going to be arranged, how it was going to be put out. And then this cycle, it propelled me to think even more deeply and engage even more deeply with what Shemitah actually is, because there are ways, as an artist, you don't actually have to think about something until you have to think about how to express it. So a lot of what came out of this cycle of putting together that video has deepened my sense of Shemitah and Shemitah practice. And that had to do with, how do you define rest in a perpetual cycle of activity? Because our community at large does not observe Shemitah. And even if we were to, there are all kinds of questions about how can you do that sustainably. So how do you find the rest in that? How do you mark the 7th year nonetheless as a way of finding rest? And I think part of what we found in making this video, and this is an idea that the videographer came up with, because we were talking about how do you show rest visually? And my videographer, Michael Mina, said, what if we film people just exhaling, just breathing in deeply and exhaling? And that became a very beautiful sort of a shortcut way to show, what we were trying to get at, which is this, it's both rest and release, right? You're releasing when you exhale. And that really it turned my attention more clearly to how do I find places to exhale? How and where, in ways, in times, in a sort of this perpetual cycle of activity where I wouldn't normally be thinking about it. Another big element that I didn't mention in the making of this video was that it was shot in an urban botanical garden. And part of what was really important to us was to show both people working in the garden and also the kind of wildness of it, what happens when you let things grow wild, and to show the proximity of that garden to the city. Philadelphia is the city I'm in, and this is where this garden is, Bartram's Garden. several of the shots show like a wild meadow where you can see the city in the background. And to me, also that kind of encapsulated, bringing the wild into urban existence is sort of the same as like bringing Shemitah or mini Shabbat into your day-to-day existence.
That was so beautiful.
I think the other thing that was really sort of working on this video and working again with the music and the text really brought to the fore for me was sort of looking at the relationship between art and Shemitah. And I mean art in the broadest sense, like in that creating music is also creating art. But we were also showing this specifically with visual art. And that's why I wanted to bring visual art into this video. And I asked my friend, Selena Alco, who is an incredible visual artist, I called this meeting basically between Selena and Michael, the videographer, and me. And I said, I don't know how to do this, but I would love to create a video that incorporates music and visual art and expresses Shemitah, expresses rest and sabbatical and release. And I think what was interesting to me about the intersection between art and Shemitah is, well, there are several things, but one of them is what they have in common, which is they both, when they're done well, compel you to be in the now and to appreciate the moment and the beauty of a moment. They both have that same function, in a sense. They both lift you outside of your day-to-day, and that they're, in a sense, in tension with each other, because to create art is work. So how do you think about, does taking a year of Shemitah also mean not making art, because that would be a release of work? So I'm still interested in that interplay, because I feel like art actually is work and also is a vehicle, a channel for release. And so how do you harness the potential of art, making art, being immersed in art, appreciating art, to help facilitate a sense of release?
I love that. And I love bringing the word release in with Shemitah as well. In the years where we're not plowing our fields, stuff is still growing, right?
Right.
The earth is just being kind of left to its own devices. Everything becomes a lot more local and a lot more earth driven, as opposed to the other years, which are people driven in a way, in that kind of covenantal relationship, which we talk about with Josh and Ellen earlier in the episode about what does it look like to have a covenantal relationship between human beings and the land, human beings and the earth as an entity.
I think, a couple more things about just like connections between art and Shemitah come to mind. And one of them is that I want to mention is that part of the inspiration for getting this video finished was the Hazzan Shemitah art competition, which, I really think of it, Shemitah Art Motivator is really what it was. That this organization Hazzan, which is about Jewish sustainability and relationship to the land, sponsored this opportunity for artists to create art about Shemitah and submit it. And what I thought was fabulous about that was that they basically created this whole platform that was a way of engaging further with this idea, which is still so foreign to most of us, in our lives in 2022. And in the act of sort of engaging with all the art that was produced as a result of this initiative, I think that in and of itself was sort of offered moments of Shemitah for people to be able to, like I was saying before, because art does that same thing. It lifts you out of your workaday routine and it forces you to kind of like engage with the now and engage with beauty, like revel, just be for a minute, just be, and revel in what's in front of you, which is exactly what Shemitah asks of us. So I will say that. And then I will say that, of course, there's something about the concept of Shemitah that really kind of inspired a lot of other kind of artistic ideas that I haven't even gotten to working on yet. So I feel like it's motivation over the next 6 years now to think about how do I bring those things to the fore.
That's beautiful. And I hope you do. Rest and release, it's often in those moments where it's easier for a song or a dance or something else to be channeled, is when I am letting myself just be and revel in what is around me. I love that language. And even watching the video, which of course we'll link to in the show notes, watching someone take a deep breath, inhale and exhale, has an effect on me as the watcher. And now I'm thinking about a conscious inhale and exhale. That's kind of like a Shabbat in miniature. And Shabbat is just like a Shemitah in miniature. And Shemitah is just like the world that we want in miniature. And art is kind of a channel through all of these different facets.
Exactly. It's all of it. Each of those things is like a little taste of Olam Haba or Ha'olam Shahaya once, maybe Gan Eden. How do you bring those little moments of Gan Eden and Olam Haba into Ha'olam Hazeh, the one that we're in the moment?
Well, certainly your music and your art and your bringing together of people in song and spirit has done that for me, and I hope for our listeners. And I want to thank you so, so much for taking the time, the rest, and the release to speak with me today.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. Really, really delightful.
We're going to link to Jessi's Bandcamp and to the Sej Años video in the show notes. And also make sure to stay to the end of the episode where we will be playing this beautiful song in its entirety. I hope you get to take a moment to rest and revel in that space. And with that, we'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody. We're going to close up our time today as we usually do with a little bit of practice in all this conversation about nature and our connection to the earth, how space and time are connected in the cycle of the year as they are in the cycle of our lives. So we're just going to get into a comfortable position and sit with some connection to either the floor, or maybe you're outside taking a walk. Just feel the bottoms of your feet as they touch the ground or touch the floor of your room where you're sitting. And we take a quotation from the book of Deuteronomy that says, Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, that an earthling, an Adam, is like a tree of the field. And in our own way, we are that. And we're going to take a moment to center in that spot of feeling the ground or the floor beneath your feet in its rooted way. How are we connected to this earth? And how might we feel in any moment the energy of that earth coming up through us, through the ground from which we come, to which we return, and through which we are nourished our entire time here. We gain our nourishment, and we actually do have a trunk. That's even what we call it, through which our bodily fluids flow, through which the air that we take in, just like the tree does, we take it in through our pores. We soak in its beauty through our senses, and it turns into oxygen It turns into blood in our veins that flows through and nourishes us to the tips of our fingers, the tips of our toes, and all of our internal organs. And we pause for a moment just to feel that flow from the sky, from the sun, from the earth, from the rains and the dew in its season. And over the years, the patience that it takes to grow, to be tall, to be strong in one's core, strong enough to bring forth fruit for sharing and for the nourishment of others. May we, in our own time, learn to share our gifts as freely as those of the trees. And may we remember to live in partnership with nature, with time, and to be a blessing to our natural elements as they continue to be a blessing to us.
Wow, Ellen, thank you so much for guiding us through that. I feel a little more expansive now, a little more in tree time. Guess that's what we're calling this episode. I love it so much. Thank you once again, Ellen and Josh, for being with us. Thank you, Christy Dodge, for editing. Thank you, Melissa, for show notes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.